Hey everybody, Kim Seaver here. Today I'm gonna show you how I make my sourdough bread. I know there's a ton of sourdough bread videos on YouTube, but I posted a picture on Instagram the other day and cross-posted it to Facebook. And someone asked me for a recipe, so I gave them my recipe, and then someone said, hey, you should do a video of this. I'd watch it. So here it is. I'm not sure I'm gonna do very many cooking videos, but anyhow, here's my sourdough bread video. So here's my current loaf. It takes me several hours, pretty much all day, to make a loaf of bread because I have to wait for it to rise all day. A lot of this is going to be used up for toast this morning, and some people will probably use it for sandwiches this afternoon. So by the time it comes ready to put the bread in the oven tonight, this loaf will be almost gone. So I just kind of have to gauge when I make it. So yeah, that's why I'm decided to make a loaf of bread. I should mention that right now it's like 6 o'clock, 10 after 6 in the morning. So I haven't showered yet. I'm probably a mess. I'm wearing my pajamas. I'm wearing a hoodie because I've been working for the last hour and a half. And we don't have the furnace on until right about now. So just trying to keep myself warm while I was working. Anyhow, yeah, so I'm starting early, and I'll probably be putting in the bread tonight, around 9 o'clock or something like that, so it can rise all day. You can let it rise all day, or you can let it rise all night while you're sleeping, and then do it first thing in the morning. Doesn't really matter. So the first step I gotta do is add my starter to my bowl. So I don't really measure it out. I just put a bunch in and then just kind of cut it off. So this starter is super easy to make. You just need equal parts flour and water. I usually start off with a small amount. Usually it's around like a cup or so. I measure it out by weight, but it works out to about a cup or so. So equal parts flour, water, and then you either let it sit open and let the yeast come naturally, or you can get it started quickly by using regular yeast, and then the natural yeast will mix in over time. Anyhow, yeah, I'll show you how to feed the starter later on. When I make my bread, I like to make it measuring by weight. So I use this digital scale I got for a present a while back, Christmas or my birthday, I can't remember. Anyhow, so I just pop my mixing bowl on. Hopefully it's not too dark there. And then, actually, let me just adjust it so we can see in the light better. Sorry about my fat finger there. There we go. So then I just click this tare button. I don't know if you have a digital thermometer or digital scale yourself, but if you do, probably a similar feature. And then what I try to do is I do 60% the amount of water to the amount of flour I use. So if you use 1,000 grams of flour, then you would use 600 grams of water. That makes too much bread for me. That makes like 2 loaves. So I'm gonna half that. I'm gonna do 500 grams of flour and 300 grams of water. So all I do is I just keep adding flour until I get to 500 grams. Too much, so I pull a little bit out. Now I tare my weight again, and I put in 300 grams of water. Shout out, by the way, to Pampered Chef. We love this measuring cup. We use it all the time for, we don't really use the dry one on this side. We just use traditional measuring cups for that, but definitely use it for liquids, oils, and whatever else. So it's actually cracked. Got to order a new one, but just haven't got around to it yet. Anyhow, so I just add 300 grams of water, which should be almost all this water. got to be careful because it's a lot harder to take out water than it is flour. Yeah, there we go. Look at that. Ooh, just a little over, but it doesn't really make a much difference. All right, now that's all you need. You just need the starter, flour, water. You don't have to add any oil. You don't have to add any salt. Nothing like that. So now I just add my bowl to my mixer. This mixer we actually got for free. We bought it with Air Miles. So love it. It's called a Breville. It's not a KitchenAid, but it's very similar. So now I just add the dough hook. You could do this all by hand, not a big deal. Just make sure you knead it for 10 minutes. And then I just put this down, turn it on to knead, and I just let it go for 10 minutes. All right, now I'm going to feed the starter. I have my dough kneading in the background, so it's just ignore that noise. But since I have 3/4 of a loaf of bread right now, and I'm making a brand new loaf, I'm not going to put too much. I'm not going to feed the starter too much. So I'm probably just going to do 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of water. It's so similar to how I did. Actually, I better take this fork out. So how I did with the bread. So I'm going to tare the weight and just add in 50 grams of flour. Alright, 52. Starter definitely doesn't matter if you're off by a little bit. And then I'm just going to add my water in. And just enough to get to 100. There. Alright, now all I need to do is stir it. So all I'm doing is I'm combining the flour and the water and the remaining sourdough starter together. And then, over the next 24 hours or so, the yeast that was in the existing sourdough starter is going to start to feed on the new flour that I just added. So that's it. I should mention that I used whole wheat flour, 100% whole wheat flour in both the bread and the starter. You can use white flour if you want, or a mixture, whatever you want. I just use whole wheat flour. Sometimes I'll add white flour in the starter if I'm being lazy, because our whole wheat flour bucket is a lot bigger and heavier than our white flour bucket. Alright, it's been 10 minutes. Put this up here. I'm also making breakfast, so at the same time I'm making this bread, so you might hear things going like kettle and stuff. So now I just clear off my dough hook. There's my dough. Right, now that my dough is mixed, I'm just going to place it off to a counter, off to the side, out of the way. Normally if I was making a typical loaf of bread, I would probably put it in the oven to proof. But because this sits all day and people need the oven for making supper or whatever, I just put it off to the side here in our galley. And it doesn't really matter if it's a warm place or whatever, because it's going to be rising all day. And then I just put a wet cloth on top of it. Don't flour it, don't oil the bowl or anything. Wet cloth is just to keep it humid inside, so the top of the dough doesn't form a crust, dry out and form a crust, and because if it forms a crust then it won't rise properly, it'll stop it from rising anymore. So yeah, next time we'll check it in a few hours. Probably in about 12 hours or so, 10, 11, 12 hours. Just actually probably check it in about 6 hours. See how it's, show you what it's looking like, and then again another 5 hours after that before we get ready to start cooking it. Alright, so here's my dough. It's been a little over 6 hours since I put it in here and covered it up. You can tell it's risen quite a bit. It has a little bit of form. If I put more sourdough starter than I did today, then it wouldn't have this form. It'd be pretty flat, have a bunch of bubbles on top. But it doesn't really matter in the end, the way we cook it. If it's a bit moist, or if it's like this, it doesn't make that big of a difference. Yeah, so that's about it. I'll let it sit for another 6 hours so it rises some more, develops a little bit more flavor. Also, my cloth was almost dried out, so I had to wet it again. You could also use plastic film. I've seen lots of people use that. I prefer not to use it. It just seems like a waste to me. But you can use it if you want. And here's the sourdough starter that I fed this morning. You see all these little bubbles in here. That tells that the yeast is working. So it's great. If you don't feed it every day and you let it go too long, the yeast will eventually die off because it runs out of food. So that's why it's important to feed it at least a little bit every day to keep it active and alive. So what I'm doing here is I am prepping the dough for putting it in the oven. I'm just putting some flour on the edge, pulling it away, and then I'm going to take it out and I'm going to shape it. See here, I pull it out and I start shaping it into a ball, pulling the bottom, and this bottom is going to end up being the top when I put it into the oven. But anyhow, I put it into a ball, put it back in the bowl, and then cover it with my wet cloth again, which I've re-wet again. Okay, it's been almost 15 hours now since I started my dough. There it is. It's risen. I've shaped it to go in, and here's the dish I use. So I use this dish. This is really the only dish I have that I can use. You need something with a lid. A Dutch oven would work perfectly, like especially a ceramic covered Dutch oven, or any other casserole dish, preferably with a ceramic lid, but this one seems to be working fine. So what I'm going to do next is I am going to put this dish in my oven. And then I'm going to turn this up to 500. Yes, 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Seems really high, but that's what we cook it at. There we go. So now it's just preheating. So the reason why we do 500, a couple reasons. First, because I'm preheating the baking dish. What it's going to do is it's going to get it super hot, and when I put the dough into the baking dish, it's going to create this sear on the surfaces that the dough is touching, which will basically make it non-stick. So I didn't put anything in the baking dish. I didn't grease it, didn't flour it, nothing. So this is going to make a huge difference. Another thing it does is because there's a lid on top and this temperature is super hot, what's going to happen is it's going to create this steam inside the baking dish. And so it's going to help the bread rise, and it's also going to help create this this chewiness to it. So while I'm waiting for the oven to preheat, just a little bit of information about this dough. So as you previously saw, I shaped this dough. So it's round on the top, right? And underneath it's all messed up and crooked. And what's going to end up happening is once it's preheated, I'm going to pull the baking dish out. I'm going to take the lid off, and then I'm going to dump this dough in upside down. So what you see, the smooth surface on the top, that's gonna be on the bottom. That's gonna be the bottom of the loaf, and all the nooks and crannies on the bottom, that's what's gonna be on the top, and what's gonna give the sourdough all of its character. All right, so it is done, or the oven's preheated. So now I need to take out the baking dish.
Hi, Papa.
Just gotta be very careful because it's super hot.
Yeah.
So I'll close this up.
Yeah.
Now all we need to do is pull this dough out. And like I said, put the top on the bottom. Whoop. Oh well. So as you can see, I got lots of folds and whatnot the way that I had it in the bowl there. Now all I'm gonna do is put this lid back on and put it back into the oven. I set my timer for 30 minutes. So now that I have the bread in the oven, I just wanted to mention something. I've been working on this dough for the last 15 hours or so, but the 15 hours isn't a set time. I mean, you can let it rise for 12 hours, you can let it rise for 18 hours. It doesn't really matter how long you let it rise for, there's no exact amount. That's just what works for me. I just get it done in the morning and then put in the evening, right before I go to bed, so that's fresh in the morning, or vice versa. You know, I do it in the evening and then take care of it in the morning or whatever. So just whatever works for you. And this really isn't precise. You saw at the beginning of the video that I didn't really measure out my starter. I just put in some starter. And other than how much flour, you want to make sure you get your flour and your water ratio right. You got to make sure that you cook it on the 500 degrees. Other than that, you know, it's really not that precise, and yeah, your bread's gonna be very forgiving. My timer just went off, so now next step I'm gonna do is take off the lid. See, it roasts pretty nicely, but we're not quite done yet. Now what I do is I set the timer for 5 minutes. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a nice deep color in the crust. Alright, 5 minutes are up. Time to pull this baby out. Turn off my oven first. There we go. Just bring my bread over here. Turn it over. Alright, here's my bread. So here's the smooth side that I put down. It's super hot. And here's what it looks like on top. You can see some of these character lines that I showed you before. I'm just going to show you here what this bread looks like here. It looks pretty cool. The flour left over gives it a nice color and texture. Can you hear that cracking sound? Yeah, so there it is. That's my sourdough bread. So the last step I take is I get a wet cloth. This is actually the same cloth that I had over top the bowl before. And just drape this over. And what this does is, as the bread is cooling during the night or during the day, as the case may be, the moisture will help soften the crust, so you don't have too hard of a crust. If you wanted to have a hard crust, which some people prefer, then just use a dry cloth just to keep off bugs and dust and whatever else. So yeah, that's it for my sourdough bread. Hope you like this video.